Okay, welcome. Thank you, Dr. Gray. Wonderful way to end. I have spoken. I'm going to borrow that. uh, thank,
Say that all the time. I don't know where it came from, you know.
pretty powerful. Pretty powerful. In case it wasn't clear, yes. So thank you for being here today, for sharing this special moment with us. This is our first public outing as Metaspore. I'm Anicka Yi. I'm an artist and the founder of Metaspore. Before we begin, first I want to share some acknowledgments. I want to thank 419, our gracious hosts today. Ellen O at Stanford Arts, back there. My galleries, Gladstone, Esther Shipper, and 47 Canal. My studio team, who came all the way from New York, and Romina Greenfield, my director of research, who has helped build this program with me. And to Miguel Novello, my co-instructor at Stanford, all the speakers and performers for being here, the food vendors, and the developing Metaspore community, and everyone here today. So thank you for being here. I'm going to read some notes because I want to cover a lot of questions. So at this point, you might be wondering, what exactly is Metaspore? And that's been a very difficult and challenging question for me. And part of that is because I haven't wanted to over-define it in its zygote stages. But I want to give you an overview of the genesis of this project and where we are now. So Metaspore is a project that I conceived in 2019. I guess that was a few years ago, pre-pandemic. Time moves differently now. For me, that year represented a kind of zenith, a height that my art studio had reached in terms of being able to facilitate and shapeshift various projects, exhibitions, events, activism, publications, and so on. At that point in my professional life, I started reflecting on the many years that I had been collaborating with scientists and technologists. But I noticed that many of these collaborations were somewhat transactional. And these collaborations seemed like a missed opportunity to develop relationships of thought and creativity that were more holistic, based on shared values and shared understanding rather than solely productive. There is much more that can be done outside of our career and discipline confines. There can be so much more to these relationships than delivering on time and under budget in the service of a finite product. How can we shift or transfer our identification from one worldview to another, however minute or grand? How can we foreground our relationality? I was no longer interested in instrumentalizing one another for professional gain, but getting into real partnership, understanding each other's worlds and stakes. So I made an inner promise that this was something I needed to address. But how? I began to think, what if we acknowledged that our collaborations occur between whole, complex people? People who cannot be reduced to a project or a deadline or a discipline. People who are also themselves always in a state of flux and transitioning. What we all have in common is our constant evolution and becoming. What if our collaborations and our learning could be based on something more like a model of friendship and all its multi-directionality, rather than a linear productivist containment? For me, friendship offers a hopeful bigger picture model alongside the pressures that have pushed so many of us to the point of burnout. Friendship is the ultimate counter-capitalist model of relation. Friendship is a model for social trust. It isn't about producing surplus value or reproducing a genetic line. One doesn't need to look outside of friendship to develop rich potential for world building. Friendships are more radical and enduring than any other contract we as a species uphold. Through these ruminations on professional collaborations versus deep friendships, I began to dream about something like Metaspore, a hybrid research institute, or maybe a collective that could bring artists, science, and technologists together in a deeper, more sustainable way. But in the midst of this serious dream work, the 2020 COVID pandemic came and totally obliterated my hopes. Though ironically at the same time, through the calamities of 2020 and beyond, I became more convinced than ever that something like Metaspore must take shape. However, the model would need to be completely different. The pandemic drove home the tremendous uncertainties we live with, and these uncertainties that I'm calling planetary paradigm shifts, from global political conflicts to climate catastrophes to public health emergencies and crumbling nation states. In the midst of all this disruption, I'm asking if we can deconstruct what it means to be present and engaged with these planetary paradigm shifts. What if, rather than feeling panic about these changes, we could use this uncertainty as our greatest strength? Hasn't uncertainty been the central motif of life on this planet? Why are we so at odds with the poetics of the universe? I've always said that artists and scientists are very much alike. It's just that we work in reverse timelines. Scientists have their hypothesis and then spend the next 20 or 30 years of their career trying to prove it, whereas many artists won't fully understand their hypothesis until the latest stages of their practice. So my question with Metaspore is, can we do important, vital research by activating art as a philosophical tool? Could this art-informed research progress without a rigid hypothesis and lead us into truly wild unknowns? Can we research in a more situated, embodied way, rather than at a point of removal or abstraction or predetermined outcomes? By collaborating without disciplinary discrimination and without being reduced to efficient machines of industry. My vision for Metaspore is for it to be a nomadic research initiative, where each chapter of Metaspore expands rhizomatically by embedding itself in a region and hybridizing with local collaborators. This is similar to the way an artist works. We build on central questions and travel globally to create new site-specific projects that open up new avenues of thought, creativity, and action with new audiences that would otherwise not be possible. Metaspore is transdisciplinary in that it is not about fully homogenizing or synthesizing the disciplines. It's more about gaining literacy and exposure with different communities of thought, taking on shared concerns, and seeing how much each community is an ecosystem that is struggling to produce ideas and actions. As an artist, I'm interested in a scientist's or technologist's struggles, not just their products. I'm hoping that this kind of deeply invested collaboration can help us move beyond knowledge production for knowledge's sake. This is not a matter of simply replacing old data with new data. Rather, it's about changing our fundamental understanding about our areas of study, about ourselves and each other, and the ways of the world. When we think about knowledge, it's one thing to master the study of oceanography, and another thing entirely to dive into the sea and learn to swim. Through Metaspore, we want to learn to swim. We want to use direct embodied experience and participation as a counterpoint to consuming ideas and information from a place of detachment. We want to foreground a lived reality, even if we don't completely understand that reality. So while Metaspore is nomadic, each chapter is determined by its particular locality and relationality and the rituals that are unique to the place and time. So today's symposium culminates the first chapter of Metaspore, which was made possible through my residency this past year with Stanford Arts. This first chapter was the incubation chapter, in which I began developing the language and approach of Metaspore through discourse with my peers, my studio, and a small group of Metaspore student fellows from Stanford. It was important to allow Metaspore to start developing inside the time frame of this discourse and its kernels of inspiration, rather than to predetermine explicit goals from the beginning and simply execute them, independent of the shared experience at Stanford and the activities around the incubation period. The Metaspore student fellows were selected from a small pool of applicants who were interested in working with me. We ended up selecting just 8 fellows, ranging from PhD students in bioengineering to biology to computer science, as well as art history and documentary filmmaking and studio art. I told the students that they were not expected to be experts. In fact, thinking like an expert might just hinder their growth and ability to experience the radical present. Rather, the point of the course was to fundamentally question all of our prior conditioning. I wanted to remove them from the rigidity of their academic environment, where they were pressured to perform as experts in training for their chosen field. What if we were not only allowed, but encouraged to be more open about just how much we don't know? With the fellows at Stanford, we explored the Metaspore research areas through readings and discussions, but also through sensory workshops at a weekend retreat, as well as art making and a final exhibition. I won't go into detail about the research areas now, but each of your pamphlets briefly describes the 6 broad fields that I want to investigate with others through Metaspore in these embryological stages. Beyond these research areas, a critical part of Metaspore's research is the impossible task of debunking the favored Western notion, the autonomous self, which has been culturally dominant since the Enlightenment. This Enlightenment ideal of detachment from nature and the living world has resulted in our present-day siloed disciplines and preference for abstract knowledge, all of which is hindering our understanding of ourselves and the natural world, our own planetary well-being. We have relied too heavily on concepts rather than lived reality. As profound discoveries are made in contemporary fields, from artificial intelligence to synthetic and microbiology to quantum physics, we are noticing a new synergy between these youngest fields and more ancient ways of knowing, from native science to Buddhist philosophy. It's becoming more evident through so many avenues, from the experiential to the biological, technological, psychological, philosophical, and spiritual, that the notion of a unified, independent self is wholly misguided. So now, I've invited you all here to entertain for one day this Metaspore outlook. My question for the day is whether we can all show up in a more holistic way. What I mean by that is, can we try to access a deeper reality, to grasp the ideas discussed today through more than only our intellect, through our sensorium, our awareness, and our perceptions, perhaps even through what I call non-conceptual space. For me, living more holistically and honestly means embracing the radical possibility that yourself at the deepest level is not at all what you've always thought of it as being. Letting go of ingrained psychological patterns can lead us to profound transformation in our understanding of human and more than human existence. I'm interested in exploring dimensions of not knowing, meaning that we momentarily soften what we already know, what we think we know about ourselves and the ways of the world. Let's listen with our sensorial awareness today. I invite you to embrace an embodied presence, to soften, to settle, to relax, and to open up to what's here. Can we unhook the familiar in order to give ourselves a chance to taste the unfamiliar, to welcome a new experience? In summary, Metaspore is a philosophical approach in constant evolution. It is a developing philosophy in which everybody has a stake. In some ways, Metaspore is an art project. In other ways, Metaspore is a science project. In other ways, Metaspore is truly a project of friendship and social trust. We do not promise to deliver the utmost tangible utilitarian solutions. However, we do promise to deliver today new experimentation and research through which more concrete outcomes may inevitably arise. In closing, I'd like to borrow a blessing of sorts from one of our esteemed speakers today, Kriti Sharma. May we evolve. Evolution as ceremony and science and art for a species in transition. Thank you, everyone, for coming and sharing this momentous day with us. Without further ado, I'm beyond elated to transition us into the program we've prepared for you today. We'll be starting the official program off strong and lively with our crackling first panel at 11. I can't wait to hear the insights of our brilliant and charismatic speakers as they reflect on the first theme of the day, permaculture. But before we start the panel, please let me introduce my dear friend Nate Mullen, who will guide us through some logistics and a warm-up activity. Thank you.